Google Developer Student Club's.
Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. Today we are going to cover a topic, how to get started with Angular and Firebase. And before we start, let me introduce myself. My name is Alexander. I'm Google Developer Student Club lead at Conestoga College, Waterloo, Ontario, Canada. And today I have a guest speaker, a wonderful guest speaker, Deepa. She's going to introduce you to Angular and Firebase more. Yep. Cool. I will pass it to you, Deepa.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening in whichever part of the world you are from. I think we can get started with this. Can you see my screen, Alexander? Okay, thank you.
Cool.
So let's see, how do we get started with Angular and Firebase today? And before I get started, I wanted to let you know, who am I? I am Deepa. I work at Adobe as a QE developer. I also build websites, and I'm involved in the community. I'm one of the organizers at GDG San Jose. I'm an ambassador at Women Tech Makers. I'm also a member at Women Who Code. And fun fact about me is I love coffee. I'm a coffee addict. So there are ways that you can connect with me. There's a GitHub, LinkedIn, and a Twitter handle. And each and every slide would have a Twitter handle on the top right. So before we get started, there are some prior knowledge required for this session. So you should know what is HTML, if you know, and JavaScript or TypeScript. One of these is good to have, but you should know one of these for sure. And then you should know what is Node.js, which is a backend JavaScript runtime environment. Express.js, it's a backend framework. You should also know about NoSQL and SQL. These are databases that you can have it in your projects. So with that said, the session is parted as two. I have made it the first part with what is a web architecture. We'll talk about a lot about Angular first. Then we'll move on to part two. We'll talk about Firebase and its features. And there will be a demo at the end with both Angular and Firebase together. So we'll see how it works. And there'll be code snippets here and there. Alexander would be posting certain links with you so that you can follow along. So just to begin with, this is a three-tier web architecture consisting of a presentation layer and a business or a logic layer, and then the data layer. So this is a traditional three-tier. So considering client-side or the front end, which HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and backend is where all your logic is. So for example, Node and your database would be a combination of both of those, right? And database is where you store your data. And what is Angular? It is a open source development platform for building single page applications. So I'll give you this brief history of how it all started. Understand that it is a platform which is a component-based framework for building scalable web applications. It also has collection of libraries, including routing, forms management, client-server communication, and many more libraries to it. So now let's talk about a brief history. Angular has been around for more than a decade. It was started as AngularJS in 2010, and it was written in JavaScript mainly at that time. So it followed, it supported a couple of architectures, model view controller and model view model architecture as well. And it had data binding and dependency injection, and it was running only on the client side or the front end side initially to begin with. And then in 2016, we had a major revamp of AngularJS, which was totally written in TypeScript instead of JavaScript. So this helped, this version helped to support mobile and low-end devices. So that was a major thing. It was also, it started off with component-based. We'll talk about what is component-based in a moment. And Angular 3 was skipped because there was some kind of a confusion with Angular routing package that was already released with version 3. So they punted version 3 and then they released it as version 4. Today we have Angular 13, which was released last year in the month of December, November and December. And there are a lot more features to it now. There are some deprecations happened in Angular 13, mainly the one that the Internet Explorer support was taken down. So with that said, that's a history of Angular. It's been around. It's a very, very robust framework. So now let's move on to the architecture, right? Every Angular app has certain things. So this makes it this makes the architecture of an Angular application. For example, to begin with, every Angular app has modules, which every Angular app has a root module, which provides a mechanism to launch your application. And on top of it, you would have components, which is nothing but it defines a class that holds your logic and data. We will see the code snippet in a moment. You would understand much better, but understand these are the terms that you need to know when you're talking about, when you're thinking about Angular architecture. So the components will have a decorator, which is a special kind of declaration that can be attached to a class or a method, etc. So then moving on to templates. Templates are, it is nothing but HTML snippet that would tell Angular how to render your component in an Angular application. And metadata is what processes the class and displays it, right? These are the data that you get it from your component, and then it processes it and it displays it as well using templates. So next comes service. You need to connect somehow your Angular app with the backend, right? For that, you have services, and this is something that we will be talking about when we do a demo of how we can create an authentication service. We're using Firebase today. So that's something to note. And dependency injection is something, it basically delegates the tasks to your services. For example, if you have to validate the input user, or if you have to fetch data from the server. So those are the things dependency injections will do. So here is a code snippet of app module. So if you can see, this is a decorator with a module. It is an object, which I'm going to be talking in detail pretty soon. And then there's a class. And here's a component. A component would have metadata, which contains a selector. And then each and every component will have HTML and a CSS attached to it. Think of it when you're developing a web project. You begin with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, right? Which is a very similar thing here as well. But each and every smaller files that you create, but smaller, it would be separated as a component. So it's a miniature of your smaller projects or your project structure, and you create something with vanilla JavaScript, right? But here we are using TypeScript instead of JavaScript. Now, what are the features of Angular, right? So let's see, it uses Realtime. For those of you, if you are aware of HTML, how HTML page renders and all those things, you should know that DOM is a document object model, which is a tree structure, and Angular uses the real DOM. It uses the browser's DOM. Unlike other frameworks, some frameworks use it as virtual DOM and things like that, but Angular uses only real DOM. And then moving on to, it supports only TypeScript now. TypeScript is a language that is that is created by Microsoft and maintained by them, but Google uses this. And also Angular platform is open source and it's maintained by Google again. Then two-way data binding. It refers it might sound very confusing, but then I'm going to show a demo in a moment. Two-way data binding is sharing between a component class and its view, and the other way around too. So in a moment, I'll show you what it is. So then Angular also uses something called as a Jasmine framework for testing. And like I said, you can, after 2016, Angular started support for mobile. So you can use it along with other open source frameworks such as NativeScript to make it work with Angular as well. So here is, can you post the link?
Sure. Yeah, I will do that. Sorry, I will pause you for a second. I just see there are a few questions coming. I forgot to mention, so we will have like a few pauses between like different topics, and then we will answer all of the accumulated questions then. So
Okay. Sounds good. So here is this is a project. You can use the Stackblitz for creating, you don't have to use an IDE and get everything installed, but this one gives you, this is a browser IDE where you can create Angular project. It's very similar to Code Sandbox. So here I haven't added any components, but when I created a project, it came with these main app components, right? So this is what I wanted to talk about data binding. So for example, here I'm binding this name and inside of my class here in the app component, and I'm trying to use the same thing inside of the HTML. So for example, if I go ahead and do this, the view takes it and it displays it too. Ideally, it can also fetch it from a server too. For example, whenever you try to fill in a form, and then at the end it gives you all the information together, right? So this is something that to note for two-way data binding. So now let's see what are the websites that use Angular. Upwork uses, weather.com uses, Microsoft, Xbox.com, that website uses it, and PayPal also uses it. There are some, Google public-facing websites like developers.google.com, fonts.google.com. These are all the websites that are made with Angular. So for more details about what are the websites built with Angular, you can go check out madewithangular.com. So there's a bunch of them there, but these are the top ones that I picked it up from. So Angular supports something called as CLI. CLI stands for Command Line Interface. First, you need to install this as a node package or a yarn package. And then once you have it, you can create an Angular project or app using this command ng new app name, right? Anything that starts with ng, refers to Angular. So ng new app name is how you create, and it creates a boilerplate of all the project structure for you. So if you want to generate a component, I'm not going to read out the whole entire line, but then you can use a short form as ng gc, which is generate component. If I have to generate a header component, I use header. If I want a footer component, I can do that. And if you want to segregate, depending on what you want to create this component for. And to view it, how you would view it in localhost, you would run something called as ngserve with the port name as well. So now let's see the Angular project structure, right? I'm not going to go into detail of every single configuration. There are tutorials out there, but I just wanted to mention some things that some things here. So first off is a component is it's a basic UI building block of an Angular application. It contains a tree of Angular components. So for example, like I showed you before, there's a decorator. I'm going to show a code snippet in a moment. So if you take this app.component.ts file, this one contains a selector called app.root. And then I have two other components, which is called top bar and product list. This is how it looks like. I tweaked the CSS here so that you can see it. Can you see this? So you can share this link, Alexander. So if you see, this is the app.component.ts, which contains a selector called app-root, which is the bottommost one, the blue colored one. And on top of it, I have the top bar, which is here. And then I made it so that you can visually see that. So everything is placed on top of the app root. Okay, and so is the product list. So let's now look into what is this app.component contain. So it contains a component decorator, which says, hey, this class belongs to Angular component. What does it do? It basically gives you, it processes it, and it gives you a HTML template. So that's why you have it as a HTML template and CSS that displays it. And if you go to module, this is an ng module. This is also a decorator, and it is which says that this is a class which contains one single object, where, and then it describes the property. So basically, everything in your application parts are put together in this app module. And here I have these are the two components that I have, and the product.ts contains. This is ideally we are marking the data here, and note that we are using TypeScript, so you can mention the types here. And these are the product data that comes from this file. You could store assets, and note that there are two more things that I want to mention here. Is there are two environment files. One is for prod.ts, and this is where make sure when you are working with Firebase in this project, do not set it to true, make it false, and then you can play with it. Then you can, I can show it during Firebase time too, when we do the demo. And here is the HTML. So this is the only, thing that you will pass it on to your Angular. This renders everything. This is the root component, and it comes from this app.component.ts. Okay. And now, so we saw the code, and then now, we saw your HTML, CSS is now replaced with Angular. So why do we use Angular? When your front end grows, or if you're building an application and your application starts to grow, you don't want to deal with architectural problems that you may encounter when your application scales up. So when you use Angular, it gives you a boilerplate code, and you can also reuse your code as well. So that's about, now you have your front end. You don't have to use all those things. Instead of that, you can use this framework. Any questions so far?
Yeah, we got a few questions.
Right. So now, okay. Here, moving on to part 2, we will talk about all things about Firebase, but we are going to be talking only certain features today because it's a whole set of features. I'm not going to be talking all of them. I'm going to be picking a couple of them, and then we'll talk about that, and we'll see how we can integrate Firebase with Angular with a demo. Okay. So before we get started, I want you to understand certain cloud terminologies. So back in the days when you code, you will code, you'll maintain and manage your development and infrastructure all inside one building, so which is called as on-premises. Then after some time, cloud providers started coming up. So you have a choice to choose if you want the infrastructure to be maintained by cloud providers. Here, the blue boxes are the ones that you would manage, but the rest of them would be managed by the service providers. So when you do that way, this is an infrastructure. You just choose the infrastructure to be managed by a cloud provider. It's called as infrastructure as service. And for platform as service, for example, Google is a cloud platform service, right? Where you have to manage your application and your data. So the rest of all the backend and the infrastructure are all taken care by Google if you're choosing with Google cloud provider. And also, where does Firebase stand? Firebase is a backend as service, which is very similar to platform as service, but there are certain things that where it comes with it. So, for example, you don't have to write any backend code for certain things; it is all provided to you. Or, for example, authentication, push notifications, and data management is all added on top of platform as service. So, understand that Firebase is a layer on top of Google Cloud Platform, okay? And software as service or something, everything is managed by the cloud provider. For example, Gmail is one of them, right? So now moving on to the next one. Now, what is Firebase? I said it was initially bought in 2014 by Google. Firebase basically provided a development platform for mobile and web. So it is categorized as it is a set of tools. Yeah, it's not moving. Okay, it is a set of tools provided by Google, and Firebase is a backend as service. Like I said, you don't have to write backend code. If you're a front-end developer, it makes your life easier. So Angular developers have the opportunity just to create the application without, you don't have to set up the whole backend by yourself, but Firebase does it for you. So you can manage your backend, you can scale up with traffic, you can keep your services up and running. So under the hood, when you create a Firebase project, you're also creating a Google Cloud project. So just to give you a visual, so here is something that I wanted to show. Google here on the right is a platform as service where you can host your websites. But Firebase also has a capability of hosting your web applications. When you create a project in Firebase, it does give you an option for it. Under the hood, it uses Google App Engine hosting. And then there's something called as Google Cloud Functions, which are function as a service. To set up your serverless, you don't need to create anything. You just have to write certain functions, and then it sets up the servers for you. So it's something overlap between Google Cloud Platform and the serverless one too. I understand that you're basically it's an overlap of Google Cloud Platform. Okay. Now, okay. So what are the platforms that Firebase supports? So it supports iOS, Android, web, and also you can build apps using, you can connect your backend of your mobile apps or any apps to a Firebase platform as well. Unity uses them. So, okay, there are a bunch of features. I'm not going to be talking whole of it, but understand that you can, these are the features available in Firebase. You can build your web app, you can build your backend, release and monitor your application, collect analytics, and engage your users. So Firebase is mainly used for prototyping and for rapid application development. We'll just focus on the build, couple of features on the build feature today. So now, how does this architecture look like? So initially we had front-end for front-end, Angular as a front-end, and now the 3-tier is getting replaced as 2 with Firebase. So it is very easy for you if you're starting to learn, and you don't have to learn any backend tool if you're a front-end developer. But there is a possibility that you could add Firebase to your backend. So now we'll be talking about authentication in a moment during the demo. But I want you to understand that cloud functions are part of serverless framework that Firebase also has, which lets you write and deploy code that responds to events. For example, you have notifications on your app, right? Your mobile apps. So those events can be triggered using cloud functions. It can also interact with services such as authentication, storage, and Firebase database, Firestore database. So there are a couple of terms that I want you to know with Firebase databases, which is Firestore database and Realtime database. We'll talk about it in a moment. Cloud storage for Firebase here is mainly, you can think of it as you can store something and fetch example. For example, if you are storing images or other files, and if you want to store it there and fetch it from Firebase using cloud storage. Under the hood, although all these things work along with GCP, Google Cloud Platform, note that Firebase has its own hosting service as well. It's more of an interlap of a lot of features together. So here is one of the database that I wanted to talk about. This is Cloud Firestore. It is used for complex hierarchical data. If you want to, it is easier for organizing your data to scale. You can use collections and sub-collections. A collection can contain sub-collections. A sub-collections would contain, for example, here, a teacher who teaches in grade 5, 6, and 7, and she maintains student records. And each record is a document which contains data. So you can organize it. Cost-wise, this would be cheaper as it is document-based. And it's also, you can write complex queries to fetch those data as well. Now, talking about real-time database. This is very JSON-y like structure. It is, Firebase started, this was the very first database they started with. It is one large, big JSON file. Think of it like that. So it costs for bandwidth and storage. So it works very well with small and simple data sets. Sorting and data retrieval is easy, but then if you have a large one, it has to go through the entire huge file because it's just stored as one large file, right? You need to avoid nesting data here. And we'll also talk about how you should be careful with setting up these things. Otherwise, it'll be costing you a lot of money. So any questions so far?
Yeah, I haven't seen any new questions other than, what can we do to make an Angular app fast? That's the only one. Any comments on that?
So can you say that again? I think.
Yeah, there was this comment. What can we do to make a fast Angular app?
What do you mean by fast? It's like, is it your performance of your application, or how are you structuring your application, right? Are you storing everything in the front end? There are certain, that's when it comes in handy with the back end. If you are having a lot of stuff that needs to be rendered from your front end side of things, then it will be slower. So if you have to make it faster, probably you can think of how you can use the cheapest forms of backend where you can store and not every time get it from the front end. So that way it will make it faster.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they said they meant fast rendering. So how to make it render faster? Yeah, so cool. So
it is a single page application, right? So it usually gets it rendered, but if you have a lot of images and things like that, yes, it might slow down for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So having those things, probably you can avoid those things by having paginations or load more buttons or something like that, so that you don't have to have everything in there right away during the first load of your application, right?
Mm-hmm. You also mentioned that like Angular has server-side rendering, right? So it's essentially like everything is server-side rendered, or like some of it
No, it
is.
depends on how you can have it from the server. That's what I mentioned. I mentioned that that capability is not there with React. You have to have a separate library for that to make it work. If you have to fetch something from the server, React does not have a package by it. So you need to use other libraries to make it work. But
Yeah.
here it comes along with it. I'm just going to be showing about the authentication service.
Hmm.
So bear with me for a minute on this.
Cool. Last comment from me. So would server-side rendering make the app faster or no?
Um, like I said, it depends on what are you trying to fetch from the server. If you're trying to fetch a lot of data at once, yes, it might, but then it depends on how you modularize your application and have it. So, for example, I'm trying to give you an example. Instacart not PayPal uses this. I'm trying to see what else. If you have a lot of things that you have to fetch it might take some time. But having said that, it's very quick to, and also when we talk about databases, think of it like if you want to store it in real-time database, or you want to use it along with the cloud Firestore, right? So you can, if you have complex stuff, you can put in, like I said, you can also put it in cloud storage, right? Those images or those things can be put in there, and you can render it from there faster because it's already there for you.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
those are the things that I know. And if you have to fetch a lot of data, again, how do you want to structure your data? If you want to structure it in a complex way, like PayPal uses it, if they have to have user data, for example, they need more security. If they have to get a lot of information, how you store your data depends on what you want to store and how you want to structure. For simple data, you can still use real time.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
it's also, when you read, there is a cost, no, there's a cost associated with whenever you read any cloud service provider you take. It's there are something, when you write something to your file,
Hmm.
then it costs money. But then while there are some read write costs that might be associated with any cloud providers. I would strongly suggest you to read the documentation before you do anything.
Yeah. So essentially, just to conclude,
Mhm.
it definitely depends on the situation and your project,
That
right?
you're
It's
in. Yes.
very hard to answer this question without like having a specific like circumstances or yeah.
Yeah, if you have an e-commerce website, right? You're trying to build your own t-shirt company, right? Where you want to put all these images. Do you want to put it in the client side, right? How many of them you would put? And
Hmm.
there's a limited amount of that you can do it from the browser, right? If you
Hmm.
want to fetch a lot of stuff, then you have to use something with the backend.
Yeah. Okay. So they said they got the answer, so that's perfect. Cool. Thank you. And yeah, I think we can move on. Yeah.
Move on. Okay. So I just wanted to play you a quick video as how to get. I already recorded this. It's in YouTube, so you can go ahead and see it. You can create. How do you create a project and how do you register your application? I'm going to play this here. For example, you have to first go to console.firebase.google.com. Just Google it. It's a mouthful for me to say this website's name. So just go here, add a project, but you need to sign in with your Google account first. And then once you do it, you create a project. So for a demo project, I'm not adding any analytics. So while it creates a project for you, um, it provisions all the resources and Firebase. There's a lot of configuration that goes at the back end when you are trying to create a project with Firebase. And once you're done, you can go ahead and you can register your application. How do you do? You can go here and select if you want to do mobile, you can do it for here. I'm doing web. See, there's an option for setting up Firebase hosting that you can enable it if you want to, if you are planning to do a production one. And note that it also gives you a Firebase object for project settings, this is what I said that you will be using it in the environment file. You can also get this from the project settings. And please remove this after you play with it. Remove this application from Firebase if you're not going to be using Firebase. Right? Do not host it. You might be asked to pay for it if you are. But there is no money involved when you're trying to sign up. And moving on, how do you integrate Angular with Firebase? Once you have your application ready, you will install this package called as npm Angular Fire for Firebase. This you can also use Yarn, and Angular Fire is a library that connects your Angular to Firebase, which is what we would be doing. It gives you an option, actually. It gives you an option as what do you want to use. You want to use it for storage, authentication, you want to host this, or it gives you an option when you try to create a Firebase project, right? And then you take this configuration from your project settings, and you would stick it inside the environment.ts inside of your Angular application. And finally, inside your app module, for you to initialize it, you would be looking at whenever you run this thing, it is already it is added to your app.module.ts. So note that you can initialize it using Firebase. So now we are going to be talking about authentication. Firebase provides a lot of social sign-in providers. You can use email, password, phone, and you can also use an option not to sign in at all. For example, the anonymous option here is mainly used for gaming applications where users don't want to sign in and then play, right? They just want to play the game. So you can also have it as an anonymous one too. These are the different authentication provided by Firebase. You don't have to write in your own authentication. There's a lot involved. I try to do that. So this is very handy if you want to. If you're trying to write your own backend code, it's kind of complicated for authentication. You can use OAuth and things like that, but it gets a little tricky. So here's an example. First off, when you are trying to have a service, what do you do? You have to, like I said, NG stands for Angular, and you generate a service called auth, and then you would import all these things, right? And also make sure that I'm going to be showing you in the demo sign in with email, password, and one with Google sign in, and you can both sign in and create with email and password. These are the methods that are already available inside of Firebase. All you have to do is just use them in your authentication file. That's it. Right? You also have sign out. And here Firebase comes with the command line tools as well. You can install using npm. So whatever I was doing earlier on the website, you could do all those things from your terminal too. You first have to, when you say Firebase login, it routes you. It routes you to your browser and asks you to log into your Gmail account. And then once you do that, you can, when you say Firebase init, you can use any services. For example, you can create a database, cloud function. You can do authentication, or you can also choose. There are options available when you say Firebase init. It'll ask you what you want to initialize it for, right? So here I've given an example as hosting. And then once you're done, once you have created a Firebase project, you can package your Angular application for production and deploy in Firebase using Firebase deploy command. So here is a demo that I have a Angular Firebase authentication with email, password, and Gmail. So I have also the GitHub here. You can go check it out. This is how my application looks like. Here is my project in a Firebase console. If you go see here, this is my project that I have. I haven't set up anything. Oh, also note that you can delete this project. I'm going to be deleting it after this demo anyways. So if I go here in authentication, now I don't have any users, as you can see. But I have two sign-in methods. One is Gmail, Google, and then email password, right? I've enabled these two. So here I have this application where I can go ahead and sign in with Google, because I already did this once before. It's going to directly take me. Once I sign in, it takes me to this route, dashboard route, where I can go ahead and view my view the source code of this in GitHub. So I can also sign out. Once I sign out, it takes me back to the homepage. So I'm using 3 routes here. So note that if I go now, and then if I go to Firebase console, hopefully it shows up. See, now it shows as my Google account here. So now let's go ahead and sign up with an email. For example, if I click on this, it's not very looking fancy, but it serves the purpose of this demo. So if I go ahead and say test 123 at yahoo.com, and then if I say test, don't give this kind of password because it's not okay. Close. Now I can sign in with this. So if I say test 123 at yahoo.com, and then I'm going to say test 123. So if I go here, it is also signing me to this, right? So if I now go to my Firebase console and refresh this page, you will also see the email that I logged in with or registered with. So this is the demo that I have. I wanted to also show how and where I created my, so if you see here, inside my environment, I have this Firebase object here inside my environment. I'm going to be deleting this, so you can't use my API keys there. So this is how my project is. If you go to my GitHub, you would not see this information, but this is where you have to put in your Firebase configuration inside this one. Okay. That said, we are just moving on to the pricing now. So what does it cost for you to have Firebase, right? Most of the services are free, but there are some service, and then as you go and your application scales up, you pay as you go service, and then the pricing depends on your daily active users. For example, if you have 5,000 users who visit your application, right? Then you'd be paying about $12. And then if you have 100,000 daily users, you would be paying about $290. And then if you have a million or more, you would be paying about $3,000. Note this might change. This data I picked it up. I think I picked it up from the Firebase billing example one. So this might not be true to your stuff as well. But if you're beginning, you just have to be paying only 10 or 12 bucks a month. So note, if you are trying to set this up, there is an article that I found online. Sorry, bear with me with this color. This is how the article was. So it's very jarring to the eyes. But make sure, this particular startup, they were doing a crowdfunding campaign, and they ended up $30,000 in less than 72 hours. So they did not know how they were using it. What they did was they were syncing their data. There's something called as when you, inside of the Firebase documentation, please read through it very well. And there's if you say, keep your data synced always, like set it as true, then you would be, it would start, accumulating costs for you. So this is what they did, but then Google was nice to them, and then they took off most of the thing out. They gave them back. They did not have to pay $30,000. But note what you are, be very careful when you set up these things. Read the documentation. And having said this, Firebase usage in 2021 in Google I/O last year, it was said that Firebase uses, and there are 3 million apps that uses Firebase, and there are a lot of updates coming up, right? And according to a recent survey from Angular, they said that about 84% of developers are happy about it. Some of them are not. Why? A lot of them involving, if you are learning, if you're trying to set up a new one, it might be a little complex. So it's a steep learning curve. That's having said that, once you get a hang of it, it gets easier. So with that, we saw, well, we talked a lot about Angular, why you have to use Angular. Whenever your front end grows, you might encounter with architectural problems, so you might have to scale up your application. That's when you would use Angular. It has reusable code, and any Angular application would need a backend. So you have a choice to write it on your own, but you can also use Firebase, right? Having said this, you can take this knowledge and see if you can build this app from developers.google.com. It's a code lab. Alexander, would you be able to post this? I think you have to be signed in inside with your Gmail so that you can try this particular application by yourself and start from there, right? And what would you do for your next steps? You can learn TypeScript if you don't know. I have a QR code here which points out to my Medium article about TypeScript 101 article. You can learn about that. You can build a front-end application using TypeScript with Angular and TypeScript. And then you can create forms, routes, and you can also use it for progressive web applications with service workers, etc. And you can build your own backend or use a service like Firebase. And you can connect it to DCP if you want to. And then you can also try to build a mobile app using other frameworks, such as NativeScript and Ionic as well. So any questions?